March 3, 2019, 11:47 p.m., a small apartment in São Paulo, Brazil. A mother rocks her newborn son to sleep for what she doesn't know will be the last time. His name is Emmanuel. He's only 8 days old. By morning he'll be gone, not kidnapped, not lost, sold, and the people responsible are about to break their silence for the first time. This is the story of one of the most disturbing cases in recent Brazilian history. A case that exposed an underground network so vast, so organized, that it shocked even the most experienced investigators. A case where the lines between desperation, manipulation, and pure evil became terrifyingly blurred. What happened to baby Emmanuel, and to dozens of other children like him, reveals a darkness that exists in plain sight. And the question that haunts everyone who hears this story is simple, yet impossible to answer. How could a parent sell their own child? Before we dive deeper into this investigation, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Here at True Crime Vault, we unlock the cases that deserve to be remembered. New investigations every week. This one, you won't forget. Let me take you back to where this all began. São Paulo, Brazil's largest city. A sprawling metropolis of over 12 million people. Within this massive urban landscape exist pockets of extreme poverty, places where desperation isn't just a feeling, it's a daily reality. And it's in these margins, in these forgotten corners, that predators find their prey. Meet Juliana Santos, 23 years old in 2019, a single mother struggling with addiction, living in a cramped studio apartment in the Brasilândia district, one of São Paulo's most economically challenged neighborhoods. According to social workers who later interviewed her, Juliana had dreams once. She wanted to be a nurse. She had a loving family. But a series of tragic events, a spiral into substance abuse, and an abusive relationship left her isolated, desperate, and 8 months pregnant. The father, a man named Roberto Costa, 28, had a criminal record stretching back to his teenage years. Petty theft, assault, drug possession. He wasn't in the picture much during the pregnancy. According to police reports, he would disappear for weeks at a time, leaving Juliana alone with mounting debts, no job, and a baby on the way. On February 23, 2019, Emmanuel was born, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Healthy, perfect. Hospital records show that Juliana cried when she held him for the first time. Nurses described her as attentive, nervous, but clearly bonding with her son. She named him Emmanuel, which means God is with us. The tragic irony of that name would become apparent just days later. But behind the scenes, something sinister was already in motion. While Juliana was still in the hospital, Roberto had been making phone calls. He'd been in contact with a woman named Eliane Moreira, a 46-year-old woman who ran what appeared to be a small adoption agency from her home in a middle-class neighborhood across the city. Except, it wasn't a legitimate adoption agency. It was a front, a carefully constructed facade for something far more disturbing. According to testimony Roberto later gave to police, Eliane had approached him 3 months before Emmanuel was born. She somehow knew Juliana was pregnant. She knew they were struggling, and she made them an offer. An offer that, in Roberto's desperate state, seemed like the only solution. 20,000 reais, about $5,000 at the time, in exchange for the baby. Let that sink in for a moment. A human life, a newborn child, priced at $5,000. But here's where this case takes its first dark turn. Eliane didn't present this as selling a baby. Oh no, she was far too sophisticated for that. According to phone records later obtained by investigators, she framed it as a private adoption arrangement. She told Roberto and Juliana that wealthy couples, desperate for children, were willing to pay for expenses, hospital bills, prenatal care, compensation for time off work. She made it sound legal. She made it sound like they'd be giving their child a better life, while also solving their immediate financial crisis. Manipulation at its finest. Juliana initially refused. According to her later testimony, she told Roberto it was wrong, that they'd find another way. But Roberto was drowning in debt. He owed money to the wrong people, people who don't accept late payments. And Eliane was persistent. She began sending Juliana messages, photos of beautiful nurseries, happy couples holding babies, testimonials from other mothers who'd made the brave choice to give their children a chance at a real life. Psychological warfare disguised as compassion. On March 1st, 2 days after bringing Emmanuel home from the hospital, Juliana agreed to meet with Adrien. This meeting was captured on a coffee shop's security camera. The footage, later obtained by police, shows Adrien arriving with a folder full of documents. She's well-dressed, professional-looking. She doesn't look like a criminal. She looks like a social worker. That's the point. For 47 minutes, they talk. Adrien does most of the talking. You can see Juliana crying, shaking her head, then eventually, slowly, nodding. No audio was captured, but body language experts who analyzed the footage for the prosecution later testified that this was a textbook example of coercive manipulation. Adrien was exploiting Juliana's vulnerability, her shame, her fear, her desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, giving up Emmanuel was actually the right thing to do. By the end of that meeting, Juliana had signed papers that Adrien claimed were adoption consent forms. They weren't. They were blank templates that could be filled in later. Juliana, who had only completed middle school and was in the midst of postpartum depression and active addiction, didn't understand what she was actually signing. She thought she was giving Emmanuel a better life. She had no idea she was feeding him into a criminal network. 2 days later, March 3rd, it happened. According to Juliana's testimony, Adrien arrived at their apartment at around 8 p.m. with another woman, someone she introduced as the adoptive mother. This woman, later identified as Patricia Alves, a 34-year-old accountant from an affluent São Paulo suburb, carried a designer handbag and wore expensive clothes. She looked kind. She looked trustworthy. Patricia held Emmanuel. She cooed at him, told Juliana he was beautiful, promised he would have everything he needed, the best schools, a big house, a family who would love him. And then, according to phone records, Roberto received a bank transfer, 20,000 reais, and Emmanuel was placed in a car seat, loaded into Patricia's luxury SUV, and driven away into the night. Juliana collapsed. Neighbors later told police they heard her screaming, but Roberto convinced her it was done. It was for the best. They'd made the right choice. He used the money to pay off his debts. Within a week, he'd spent most of what remained on drugs. And Emmanuel, he was gone. But here's what Juliana and Roberto didn't know. Patricia Alves wasn't keeping Emmanuel. She was a middleman in a much larger operation. And the real buyers, the ones paying far more than 20,000 reais, were still waiting. The investigation into what became known as the São Paulo baby trafficking network began not with Emmanuel's case, but with a completely different incident 3 months earlier. In December 2018, a nurse at a private hospital in São Paulo noticed something odd. A woman had come in for what she claimed was a scheduled C-section, but the hospital had no record of her prenatal care. When staff began asking questions, the woman became agitated and left abruptly. The nurse filed a report with hospital security, which eventually made its way to the civil police. Detective Mariana Costa, a 15-year veteran of the Criminal Investigations Division, was assigned to look into it. What she initially thought would be a simple fraud case turned into something she describes as the most disturbing investigation of my career. Detective Costa started by pulling records from other hospitals, looking for similar incidents. What she found was a pattern. Over the past 3 years, at least 17 different women had attempted to obtain birth certificates for babies they claimed to have delivered, but for whom no hospital birth records existed. Most of these attempts had been flagged as suspicious, but nothing had been done beyond filing reports. Costa began connecting the dots. Many of these women had one thing in common. They'd all been in contact with the same adoption facilitator, Adrien Moreira. On January 15, 2019, Detective Costa obtained a warrant to monitor Adrien's phone. What she discovered was chilling. Adrien wasn't just facilitating 1 or 2 adoptions. She was running a full-scale operation. Text messages revealed a network of pregnant women, most from impoverished backgrounds, being offered money for their babies. There were buyers, wealthy couples willing to pay anywhere from 50,000 to 200,000 reais, depending on the baby's age, health, and ethnicity. And there were middlemen, people like Patricia Alves, who would take physical custody of the babies before passing them along to the final buyers. It was systematic, it was organized, it was business. But here's what made this case particularly complex from a legal standpoint. Many of these mothers, like Juliana, had technically consented to giving up their babies. They'd signed documents, they'd received money. and in the chaotic gray area between legal private adoption and outright trafficking, proving criminal intent becomes incredibly difficult. Detective Costa needed more than just suspicious text messages. She needed proof of coercion, proof of fraud, proof that these weren't desperate mothers making informed choices, but victims being exploited by predators. She got that proof on March 4th, 2019, the day after Emmanuel was sold. Costa's team had been monitoring a property in Moema, an upscale São Paulo neighborhood, where Patricia Alves lived. Surveillance cameras captured Patricia arriving home late on the night of March 3rd with a baby carrier. But here's what was unusual. Patricia had no pregnancy history, no adoption records, nothing to legally explain why she suddenly had an infant. The next morning, Patricia left her home with the baby and drove to a residence in Jardim Europa, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in all of South America. She went inside carrying Emmanuel. She came out 30 minutes later without him. And according to bank records later obtained by prosecutors, her account received a deposit of 120,000 reais that same day. She'd bought Emmanuel for 20,000. She'd sold him for 120,000, a 600% markup on a human life. Detective Costa had seen enough. On March 6, 2019, with authorization from a federal judge, she executed simultaneous raids on multiple properties: Elian Moreira's home, Patricia Alves's apartment, and the residence in Jardim Europa where Emmanuel had been taken. What they found there, in that mansion, would break your heart. Emmanuel, 3 days removed from his mother, being cared for by a nanny hired by the buyers, a wealthy couple named Lucas and Adriana Ferreira. Lucas, a 42-year-old businessman, Adriana, a 39-year-old surgeon. On the surface, they looked like the perfect parents. In reality, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew this wasn't a legal adoption. They knew they were buying a stolen child. Emmanuel was immediately removed from the home and placed in protective custody. He was healthy, unharmed, but the psychological damage done to everyone involved in this tragedy was just beginning. The arrests happened fast. Elian Moreira, Patricia Alves, Lucas, and Adriana Ferreira, all taken into custody. But the investigation was far from over. As Detective Costa and her team dug deeper into Elian's records, they discovered something horrifying. Emmanuel wasn't the first. He wasn't even close. Over the course of 4 years, Elian had facilitated the illegal sale of at least 43 babies. 43 children, taken from vulnerable mothers, sold to wealthy buyers, their identities erased, their origins hidden. Some of these children were found during the investigation, others remain missing to this day. And here's where the case becomes even more ethically complex. Some of these buyers genuinely believed they were going through a legal, if expensive, private adoption process. They'd been told the mothers had voluntarily given up their babies, and that the fees were for legal services and compensation. They had no idea they were part of a criminal network. But others, like Lucas and Adriana Ferreira, absolutely knew. Text messages recovered from Adriana's phone showed her explicitly discussing buying a baby and expressing concern about getting caught. The public reaction was immediate and furious. How could this happen? How could babies be sold like commodities in one of South America's largest, most developed cities? How had this network operated for years without being stopped? But perhaps the most controversial question, the one that divided public opinion and still generates heated debate today, was this. What about the parents who sold their children? Were they criminals or victims? For months, Juliana Santos and Roberto Costa remained in the shadows. They'd been questioned by police, but initially, no charges were filed against them. The focus was on Elian and her network. But as the case gained national attention, as news outlets ran stories with headlines like, "Mother sells baby for drug money," public pressure mounted for them to be held accountable. In June 2019, prosecutors made a decision. They would charge Juliana and Roberto with child trafficking and abandonment. The penalties could include up to 8 years in prison. The announcement sparked outrage, but not the kind prosecutors expected. Advocacy groups, social workers, and even some legal experts argued that charging the parents missed the point entirely. These weren't evil people who sold their baby for profit. These were desperate, vulnerable individuals who'd been systematically manipulated and exploited by a criminal organization that specifically targeted people in their situation. The debate raged for months. Were Juliana and Roberto perpetrators or victims? Could they be both? And then, in September 2019, something unprecedented happened. Juliana and Roberto agreed to speak publicly for the first time. In a filmed interview with a major Brazilian news network, they broke their silence. What they said shocked everyone. The interview was conducted by veteran journalist Ana Paula Rodrigues, known for her hard-hitting investigative reporting. She didn't go easy on them, and they didn't ask her to. Juliana spoke first. She was thin, visibly shaking, her eyes hollow. She'd been in and out of rehab since Emmanuel was taken, struggling with addiction and the crushing weight of what she'd done. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I think about him every second of every day," she said. "I know what people think of me. I know they think I'm a monster, and maybe I am. But I need people to understand. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was giving him a chance I couldn't give him myself." She described the pressure she'd been under, the manipulative tactics Adrien had used, the way Roberto had convinced her this was their only option. But she also took responsibility. "I signed those papers," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I took that money. I let them take my son. Those are facts, and I'll never forgive myself for that. Never." When asked if she was trying to justify what she did, Juliana shook her head. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for sympathy. I just want people to understand how this happened. Because if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone who's desperate enough." Roberto was defensive at first, trying to explain the debt, the threats, the impossible situation they'd been in. But as the interview went on, something shifted. When Rodrigues asked him directly, "Do you love your son?" he broke down completely. "I don't have the right to love him," he said. "I gave up that right when I gave him away." The interview was raw, uncomfortable, painful to watch. But it accomplished something crucial. It humanized two people who'd been demonized in the media. It didn't excuse what they'd done, but it contextualized it in a way that forced viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about poverty, addiction, exploitation, and the systems that fail the most vulnerable. But the interview also revealed something else, something that would become central to the legal battle ahead. Both Juliana and Roberto described, in disturbing detail, how Adrien had targeted them, how she'd somehow known Juliana was pregnant before they'd told anyone, how she'd appeared at moments of maximum vulnerability with solutions that seemed too good to be true, how she'd used language specifically designed to make them feel like they were making a noble sacrifice rather than committing a crime. This wasn't random, this was hunting. As the investigation continued, prosecutors uncovered Adrien's methods. She had informants, social workers, hospital staff, addiction counselors, people who had access to vulnerable pregnant women and would tip her off in exchange for a cut of the profits. She'd refined her approach over years, learning exactly what to say, what documents to present, how to structure the transactions to make them seem legitimate. She was, in the most disturbing sense, a professional. The trial began in March 2020, exactly 1 year after Emmanuel was taken. It was held in São Paulo's criminal court, and interest was so intense that the proceedings were broadcast live on national television. Adrien Moreira was the primary defendant, facing 43 counts of child trafficking, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Patricia Alves faced 12 counts of child trafficking and money laundering. Lucas and Adriana Ferreira were charged with knowingly purchasing a trafficked child. The prosecution, led by federal prosecutor Daniel Souza, had mountains of evidence: bank records, text messages, surveillance footage, testimony from multiple victims. But Adrien's defense team, expensive lawyers hired with the profits from her crimes, had a strategy: shift the blame to the parents who sold their children. Their argument was simple and brutal. Adrien was merely a facilitator. She didn't force anyone to give up their babies. She didn't kidnap anyone. These parents made choices they now regretted, and they were looking for someone to blame. It was a disgusting defense strategy, but legally it wasn't entirely without merit. And that's what made this case so complex. The turning point came when Juliana took the stand. For 3 hours, she was questioned by both prosecutors and defense attorneys. She was asked to describe in excruciating detail every interaction with Adrien, every moment of doubt, every time she considered backing out. Defense attorneys tried to paint her as a willing participant, someone who saw an opportunity and took it. But Prosecutor Souza had prepared her well. When asked if she understood she was doing something illegal, Juliana gave an answer that, legal experts say, may have won the case. "I knew it wasn't right," she said, "but Adrien made it seem like not right and illegal were different things. She told me private adoptions happened all the time, that wealthy people did this to skip the wait, that I'd be helping a childless couple while helping myself. She made it sound like everyone did this, like it was an open secret. And I wanted so badly to believe her, because the alternative was admitting I was doing something unforgivable. That answer captured something crucial: the difference between informed consent and coerced compliance. Expert witnesses, including psychologists and social workers, testified about the tactics used by traffickers to manipulate vulnerable individuals. They explained how poverty, addiction, and social isolation create a perfect storm of vulnerability that predators like Elian are trained to exploit. One expert, Dr. Helena Cardoso, a psychologist specializing in trauma and coercion, explained it this way: these parents didn't wake up one day and decide to sell their children. They were systematically groomed, manipulated, and psychologically broken down until the unthinkable seemed not only possible, but necessary. That's not consent, that's exploitation. The trial lasted 4 months. In July 2020, the verdicts came in. Elian Moreira was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 32 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for at least 21 years. The judge, in delivering the sentence, called her operation one of the most sophisticated and morally reprehensible criminal enterprises he'd ever seen. Patricia Alves was sentenced to 15 years. Lucas and Adriana Ferreira each received 12 years, though their sentences were reduced on appeal to 8 years due to their cooperation with authorities in locating other trafficked children. And Juliana and Roberto, the prosecutor made a controversial decision. He offered them a deal. In exchange for their full cooperation in identifying other victims and testifying against everyone in Elian's network, they would receive suspended sentences, 5 years probation, mandatory addiction treatment, and community service. Many people were outraged. They wanted jail time. They wanted punishment. But Prosecutor Souza defended his decision in a press conference that I think deserves to be quoted at length. "I could send Juliana Santos and Roberto Costa to prison," he said. "I could make an example of them. But that would miss the point of this entire case. These two individuals are not criminal masterminds. They're not predators. They're victims of a system that failed them at every level. Failed them as children when they didn't get proper education. Failed them as young adults when they developed addictions and no one intervened. Failed them as parents when they had no support, no resources, and no hope. Sending them to prison doesn't protect children. It doesn't stop trafficking. It just creates more victims. What protects children is dismantling the networks that exploit desperate parents and holding accountable the people who profit from that exploitation." Whether you agree with that assessment or not, it represented a significant shift in how Brazil's legal system approached these cases. Juliana and Roberto accepted the deal. But what about Emmanuel? Where is he now? That's the question everyone wanted answered. After being removed from the Ferreira home, Emmanuel was placed in foster care while authorities worked to determine his legal status. Brazilian law is clear. In cases of illegal adoption, the child should be returned to the biological parents if they're deemed fit. But were Juliana and Roberto fit parents? The answer was complicated. Juliana was in treatment for addiction. Roberto had completed a court-ordered rehabilitation program. Both had stable housing and were employed. They'd attended every court hearing, every evaluation, every parenting class required of them. They wanted Emmanuel back. But child welfare advocates argued that Emmanuel, who by this point was 18 months old, had been in foster care for over a year. He'd bonded with his foster family. Returning him to biological parents he didn't know, who'd literally sold him, could cause severe psychological trauma. It's an impossible situation with no good answers. In December 2020, a family court judge made a ruling. Emmanuel would remain in foster care until he was 3 years old. At that point, custody would be reevaluated based on Juliana and Roberto's progress in treatment and rehabilitation. In the meantime, they would be allowed supervised visits twice a month. It wasn't what Juliana wanted, but it was more than she thought she'd get. The first visit, captured by news cameras outside the child welfare office, showed Juliana holding Emmanuel for the first time in nearly 2 years. He didn't know her. He cried. She cried. It was heartbreaking to watch. But she kept showing up. Every visit, twice a month, without fail. And slowly, according to social workers monitoring the visits, Emmanuel began to recognize her, to smile when she arrived, to reach for her. In March 2022, on Emmanuel's third birthday, the custody evaluation was completed. The recommendation: gradual reunification. Emmanuel would begin spending weekends with Juliana and Roberto, with the goal of full custody being restored within 6 months if all went well. As of the most recent reports from late 2024, Emmanuel is living with his biological parents. Juliana has been sober for 4 years. Roberto works in construction and attends weekly therapy sessions. They live in a modest apartment in a safer neighborhood, far from the place where this nightmare began. Emmanuel is enrolled in preschool. By all accounts, he's a happy, healthy 5-year-old boy who loves dinosaurs and superhero cartoons. He doesn't know his story yet, but one day he will. And Juliana has said publicly that she'll be the one to tell him, that he deserves to hear it from her, that she owes him the truth no matter how painful it is. The São Paulo baby trafficking case led to significant legal reforms in Brazil. In 2021, the government passed legislation requiring stricter oversight of private adoptions, mandatory background checks for adoption facilitators, and harsher penalties for child trafficking. A special task force was created to investigate suspected trafficking networks, and as of 2024, they've identified and dismantled 7 additional operations, resulting in 63 arrests and the recovery of 19 trafficked children. But experts estimate that for every network discovered, several more remain hidden. The demand for babies, particularly from wealthy buyers, hasn't disappeared. And as long as there are desperate, vulnerable parents with no other options, there will be predators ready to exploit them. Eliane Moreira, now serving her sentence in a maximum security women's prison in São Paulo, has never shown remorse. In a 2023 prison interview, she maintained that she was providing a service and that the parents who gave her their babies were willing participants. She believes her sentence was unjust. She believes she'll win on appeal. She won't. But her lack of remorse tells you everything you need to know about the kind of person who commits these crimes. To her, children were products, parents were suppliers, and she was simply the distributor in a market that, unfortunately, still exists. This case forces us to confront deeply uncomfortable questions about poverty, desperation, parenthood, and accountability. It's easy to judge Juliana and Roberto from a distance, to say you'd never do what they did. But the truth is, none of us know what we're capable of when we're drowning, when we're desperate, when someone offers us a lifeline that turns out to be a trap. Does that excuse what they did? No. But does it explain it? Maybe. And perhaps more importantly, it challenges us to ask what kind of society creates conditions where selling your child seems like a viable option. Emmanuel is one of the lucky ones. He was found. He was returned. He has a chance at a normal life. But the 42 other children trafficked by Eliane's network, and the countless others sold through networks that haven't been discovered yet, many of them will never know their true origins, will never know their biological families, will grow up with fabricated identities and stolen pasts. That's the real crime here. Not just what was done to these children, but what was taken from them. Their stories, their heritage, their chance to know where they came from. Juliana Santos and Roberto Costa broke their silence because they wanted people to understand how this happened, not to excuse it, but to prevent it from happening to others. Since their interview in 2019, they've become advocates for addiction treatment, poverty relief, and family support services. They speak at conferences, work with at-risk parents, share their story despite the judgment and hatred they still receive daily. Roberto said something in a recent interview that stayed with me. He was asked if he'd ever forgive himself for what he did. He thought for a long time before answering. "I don't think forgiveness is the goal," he said. "I think earning back Emmanuel's trust is the goal. And maybe if I spend the rest of my life being the father I should have been from the beginning, maybe that's enough." Not forgiveness, just being there. The True Crime Vault has covered many cases, many tragedies, many instances of human beings at their worst. But this case is different because it doesn't offer the clean moral lines we usually look for. There are no pure villains and no pure victims. There's just complicated, flawed, desperate people making terrible choices in impossible situations. Eliane Moreira is a villain. That's clear. She exploited vulnerable people for profit, destroyed families, and treated children like commodities. She deserves every year of her sentence. But Juliana and Roberto exist in a moral gray area that makes us uncomfortable. They're victims of exploitation, yes, but they're also perpetrators who made a choice, however manipulated that choice was, that nearly destroyed their son's life. And Emmanuel? He's the true innocent in all of this. A child who didn't ask to be born into poverty, didn't ask to be sold, didn't ask to become the center of a national controversy. He's just a kid who wants to play with his toys and watch cartoons and be loved by his parents. The last public photo of Emmanuel, taken in 2024, shows him at a playground, smiling, holding his mother's hand. It's a simple image, the kind of everyday moment that millions of families experience without a second thought. But for Juliana, Roberto, and Emmanuel, that simple moment represents something profound. It represents survival, recovery, a second chance that almost didn't happen. Today, Emmanuel is thriving, but his story, and the stories of all the children caught up in trafficking networks, serve as a reminder of how fragile the line is between safety and exploitation, between family and commodity, between love and transaction. If this case affected you, if it made you think, if it challenged your assumptions about crime and punishment and victimhood, then maybe it served a purpose beyond just documenting what happened. Maybe it's reminded us that behind every true crime case are real people, real lives, and real pain that doesn't end when the verdict is read. What do you think? Were Juliana and Roberto victims or criminals? Could you forgive them if you were Emmanuel? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this investigation resonated with you, hit that like button and share this video. And make sure to subscribe to True Crime Vault for more in-depth investigations into the cases that deserve to be remembered. These aren't just stories. These are real people, real lives, and real consequences. Emmanuel's story isn't over. It's just beginning. And maybe, despite everything, it'll have a happy ending after all. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and never forget that the truth is always more complicated than it seems.